to the gem of the Supreme Buddha. The Buddha is my refuge every day. My homage to the gem of the Supreme Dhamma. The Dhamma is my refuge every day. My homage to the gem of the Supreme Sangha. The Sangha is my refuge every day. My homage to the Supreme Triple Gem. The Triple Gem is my refuge every day. Namo Buddhaya. Meritorious disciples, once our great teacher, the Supreme Buddha, was staying at the Jetavana Grove, and a Deva, a god, came to meet with the Blessed One. The god came there, and the god said to the Supreme Buddha, just as if being smitten by a sword, as if his head were on fire, a bhikkhu should mindfully try to abandon sensual lust. So that God said that a bhikkhu should try to abandon sensual lust, this craving, this desire that we have for sensual pleasures, just as if his head is ablaze, or as if being smitten by a sword. So if a person is being smitten by a sword, or if his head is on fire, then that person tries to extinguish that fire. Just like that, that God says, a person must try to make an even more effort to get rid of, to abandon sensual lust. Now at that time, meritorious disciples, our great teacher, the Supreme Buddha, through his amazing knowledge and vision, told that Deva, something different. The Supreme Buddha explains to that God, as if smitten by a sword, or as if his head was on fire, a bhikkhu should wander mindfully to abandon the identity view. So the Supreme Buddha posed the idea that a person must try to abandon sensual lust just as if his head was on fire. The Supreme Buddha explains, as if a person is being smitten by a sword, or as if a person's head is on fire, a person must make an effort, an extraordinary effort, to abandon the identity view. Meritorious disciples, what is this identity view? In Pali, it's known as Sakkaya Ditthi. That is thinking, or the view that there is something called the I, me or mine, within the 5 aggregates of clinging. We take this form as I, we take feelings as I, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. We take these 5 aggregates of clinging as I, me and mine. And because of this self view, or the identity view, no matter what we do, we always keep coming back to me, to myself and I. We have this constant need or want to maintain a self-perception. Let others know me as this. Let me others know me as this. We always try to maintain this identity view. Meritorious disciples, it is very difficult to get rid of this idea of this. It's very difficult to get rid of this self-identity view. In this samsara, we came thus far in this samsara because we took these 5 aggregates of clinging as me, as I, as mine. We did not realize its reality. As a result, we continued to travel in this samsara. But the Supreme Buddha explains, if a person understands the dependent origination, that is, in Pali, dependent origination is known as paticca samuppada. If a person understands this dependent origination, that is, how these beings come to exist, the cause and effect relationship, then that person is able to abandon this self-identity view. Meritorious disciples, if we come to have a good understanding about this dependent origination, then we are capable of abandoning this illusionary view known as the self-identity view, and we become capable of becoming free from this samsara forever. We are going to be capable of becoming free from aging, illnesses, and death. If we can understand and abandon this self-identity view, without a doubt we can attain Nibbana within a maximum of 7 lives. So, meritorious disciples, today we are going to learn a beautiful sutta that explains this dependent origination. It explains how, when a person understands the dependent origination, how that person develops this Dhamma path and attains liberation. The Supreme Buddha explains this beautifully in a step-by-step pathway. Today we are going to be learning the sutta known as the Upanisa Sutta, found in the Samyutta Nikaya of the Pali Canon. Meritorious disciples, at that time our great teacher the Supreme Buddha was staying at Savatthi. And so the Supreme Buddha addressed the bhikkhus there and said, "O bhikkhus, I say that those who knows, those who sees, are the ones who are capable of completely abandoning, completely eradicating the chains." What did the Supreme Buddha explain? The Supreme Buddha explains, "O bhikkhus, I say that the destruction of the chains is for one who knows and sees, not for one who does not know and who does not see." The Blessed One asks, for one who knows what, for one who sees what, does the destruction of the chains come about? So the Supreme Buddha explains, when a person knows what, when a person sees what, is he capable of destroying all taints. Now, meritorious disciples, what are taints? Taints are defilements that are found deep within us. And these taints are what drag us to different worlds after death. These taints drag us to the animal world. They drag us to the ghost world. These taints, these defilements that are deep within us are what takes us, drags us to all these worlds. In some lives, we are born in bad destinations, and in some lives we are born in good destinations. And the Supreme Buddha explains, if a person destroys these taints, then he is not going to be reborn again. He attains liberation. But in order to abandon these taints or eradicate, destroy these taints, one must first know and see something. The Supreme Buddha explains, one must first see and know the 5 aggregates of clinging. Now we have learned about the 5 aggregates of clinging. They include forms, they include feelings, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. So these 5 things together we call the 5 aggregates of clinging. And so previously we talked about, when we take these 5 aggregates of clinging as me, as I, and mine, then that's known as the self-identity view. The Supreme Buddha explains, but if a person realizes that these 5 aggregates of clinging are caused by a certain condition, and with the rising of that condition, these 5 aggregates of clinging come to be, and with the cessation of those conditions, the 5 aggregates of clinging ceases to exist. Therefore, these 5 aggregates of clinging are impermanent. There is no self in it. There is no I, me, or mine in it. It is filled with suffering. At one point, the Supreme Buddha explains, Sankittena panchupadana khandha dukkha. That means these five, when taken in short, in summary, these five aggregates of clinging is suffering. So the Supreme Buddha explains, only a person who sees the reality of these five aggregates of clinging as being impermanent, as non-self, as suffering, that's the person who is capable of destroying all taints that drag us to all these bad destinations. Meritorious disciples, our great teacher, the Supreme Buddha, explains, for a person who knows the origin, its passing away of these five aggregates of clinging, is a person who's capable of becoming free from these taints, is the person who's capable of destroying these taints. The Supreme Buddha explains, if a person understands what is form, forms are made of the four great elements, the earth element, the water element, the heat element, and the air element. So these things that are either these elements or something that's made of these elements are what's known as forms. So if a person understands this, and if a person realizes that the origin of forms, and if a person understands the passing away of forms, when the four great elements gets destroyed, then forms get destroyed. The Supreme Buddha explains, if a person sees this reality about forms, about feelings, about the perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, if a person sees it as being impermanent, as being conditioned by different causes, then that person is capable of destroying all taints. The Supreme Buddha explains this about the five aggregates of clinging, and the Supreme Buddha explains, because the knowledge of destruction in regard to destruction of the taints has a cause. So the Supreme Buddha explains in the beginning that only a person who knows and sees the five aggregates, its reality, only a person who sees its reality is capable of destroying all taints. And then the Supreme Buddha explains, because the knowledge of destruction of these taints has a cause. It does not lack a cause. Now here, meritorious disciples, the Supreme Buddha is referring to, once a person completely destroys all taints, he gets the knowledge that he has destroyed all taints. So the Supreme Buddha explains, that knowledge that he has completely destroyed all taints has a cause. It does not lack a cause. The Supreme Buddha explains, because what is that cause? What's the cause? The Supreme Buddha explains, it should be said as liberation. So here the Blessed One is explaining that a person who becomes liberated is the person who gets the knowledge that he has completely destroyed all things. Meritorious disciples, what is liberation? Liberation is becoming free from desire, hatred, and delusion. Becoming free from all taints. Taints, as we learned before, are these defilements that's within us that drags us to all these different destinations. It's what causes us to travel in this samsara. So once a person becomes free from these taints, he gets the knowledge. Once he becomes liberated, he gets the knowledge that he is now free from all these taints. So the Supreme Buddha explains, the cause for the knowledge of destroying all taints is liberation. And then the Supreme Buddha explains, because that liberation too has a cause. It does not lack a cause. So the Supreme Buddha explains, there is a cause for liberation. It does not lack a cause. The Supreme Buddha explains, what is the cause for liberation? So what causes, what results in liberation? The Supreme Buddha explains, it should be said, dispassion. So those who develops dispassion are the people who become liberated. Now, meritorious disciples, think about it in this way. For as long as we have craving for something, are we able to be free from it? Now, if we take a regular example, for example, for as long as we crave food, for example, are we able to be free from that craving? Are we able to be free from desire for that food? No. But the moment we feel dispassion here means non-craving. As for as long as we have passion, we aren't capable of becoming free from that passion. So for as long as we have passion for food, for example, we'll continue to crave food. But the moment we feel dispassion about something, then we are capable of becoming free from that. The Supreme Buddha explains, O bhikkhus, that dispassion too has a cause. It does not lack a cause. The Supreme Buddha explains, what is the cause for dispassion? So there is a cause for dispassion. It is not something that happens automatically. There is a cause. There is a condition. The Supreme Buddha explains, the cause for dispassion is disenchantment through understanding. In its Pali, it's known as nibbindati. Nibbindati means disenchantment that one feels, disattachment that one feels with understanding. Next, the Supreme Buddha explains, O bhikkhus, this disenchantment too has a cause. It does not lack a cause. The Blessed One explains, O bhikkhus, what's the cause for this disenchantment? How do you become disenchanted? The Supreme Buddha explains, because it should be said, it's the knowledge and vision of things as they really are that causes disenchantment through understanding. So the moment we get the knowledge and vision of things as they really are, then we are capable of becoming disenchanted. We are capable of becoming disattached from it through that understanding. Now, meritorious disciples, think of it in this way. Here, the knowledge and vision of things as they really are means knowing things in its reality. Now, for example, if we take the 5 aggregates of clinging. Now, the first aggregate of clinging is forms. Now, when we say form, we can take this physical body that we love so much is form. It's form. It's known as rupa, forms. And external bodies that we are attached to so much are also known as forms. If you take an example, during the Supreme Buddha's time, there is a bhikkhu who heard of this noble disciple called Sirima. And so this bhikkhu was very attached to her. He got to know that she's a very pretty lady, and so he got attached to her. And as a result, he couldn't maintain his monkhood properly. He was constantly thinking about her. Now he's a monk, so he became ordained to become free from desire, hatred, and delusion. But he got overcome with these lustful feelings, these desiring feelings. So one day, this lady, this noble disciple called Sirima, passed away. And so what the Supreme Buddha did was, the Supreme Buddha tried to teach the reality of this body to all those around. So the Supreme Buddha asked that this body of this lady Sirima to be kept in the cemetery. And so with time, what happened, as days passed by, this body got decayed, and odors, people couldn't bear the odor. The body was becoming decayed day by day. And so this bhikkhu got to know that this body of Sirma is in the cemetery. So what he did is he quickly came to see the body, because he was so attached to this form. Now when he saw the body, what happened is he understood the reality. He understood that this body we love so much is made up of the 4 great elements. It exists as a result of these 4 great elements, and with the cessation, with the disappearance of these elements, this body ceases to exist. So that's why the Supreme Buddha explains, if a person understands the 5 aggregates of clinging in its reality, then that person is able to destroy all taints. Now if you realize that these feelings are impermanent, they are conditioned by contact. With the cessation of contact, these feelings disappear. They cease to exist. If we think about all the feelings we have had in the past, what happened? We don't feel those feelings anymore. Why? Because contact changed. In the same way, we perceive things in the past. Perception is conditioned by contact. When we see beautiful forms, we have different perceptions. When we hear different sounds, we perceive those sounds. So in this way, the Supreme Buddha explains, perception has conditions, and with the cessation of these conditions, they cease to exist. In this way, if a person understands the reality of these 5 aggregates of clinging, then that person is capable of destroying all taints. So now the Supreme Buddha explains, this knowledge and vision of things as they really are does not just appear automatically. It has a cause. The Supreme Buddha explains, the cause for knowledge and vision of things as they really are does not lack a cause. It has a cause. The cause is concentration. So if you want to know things, if you want to see things and get the knowledge and vision of things as they really are, that means understanding the true nature of things, then what must we develop? We must develop concentration. We must practice meditation and develop concentration. The Supreme Buddha explains, those who have a concentrated mind are those who are capable of seeing things in its reality. Meritorious disciples, the Supreme Buddha explains, Samadhim bhikkhave bhavet. O bhikkhus, practice concentration, concentrate this mind. Samadhim bhikkhave bhikkhu yathabhutam pajana. That means, for those who have a concentrated mind are the people, are those who are capable of understanding things in its reality. Because meritorious disciples, our mind is always wandering, it's always restless. It's always overcome with the 5 hindrances. Either our mind is overcome with sensual desires or ill will, or our mind is always overcome by drowsiness or dullness, or our mind is always overcome by restlessness and regret, or our mind is always overcome with doubts. The Supreme Buddha explains, as long as you have these 5 things, these are known as hindrances, the 5 hindrances, you're not capable of seeing things in its reality. That's why the Supreme Buddha explains, once a person attains a concentration, he's able to obtain a mind that's free from hindrances. These hindrances are what closes our door to Nibbana, the Supreme Buddha. That's what Nivarana, hindrance, means. It hinders our path to Nibbana. So that's why the Blessed One always praised meditation, because through meditation one is able to attain concentration, and with a concentrated mind a person is able to understand things in its reality. And then the Supreme Buddha explains, because this concentration also has a cause. So there's a cause. It does not lack a cause. The Blessed One explains, because what's the cause for concentration? The Blessed One explains, the cause for concentration is happiness. When you're happy, you're able to get a concentrated mind. Now think about it through your own lives. If you're happy, you can easily concentrate this mind. But if you're unhappy, if you're always in sorrow, grief, you're not able to concentrate this mind. That's why the Supreme Buddha explained, to practice this Dhamma, when you practice the Dhamma, you're able to be happy, and that happiness is what helps you to concentrate this mind. So if you have regrets, if you repent over the fact that you cannot attain samadhi or concentration, then that regret or grief is not going to help you to get a concentrated mind. You must try to see things as being caused by conditions. So if you have the conditions, then you can get the results. So the Supreme Buddha explains happiness, being happy. This physical and mental happiness is what helps one to concentrate the mind. Now this happiness here is a happiness that's separate from the happiness you get from sensual pleasures. It's a happiness that's separate from sensual pleasures. It's a happiness that you get when you practice this Dhamma path. So the Supreme Buddha explains that there's a cause for this happiness. What's the cause for this happiness? Now we all like to feel happy, don't we? We all like to live a happy life. We all like to have concentrated minds. So if we like this, then we have to make sure we have the causes, we have the conditions. So the Supreme Buddha explains the cause of happiness is tranquility. What's the cause? Tranquility. Tranquility, meritorious disciples, is this calming of the body and the mind. The body and the mind becomes very calm, very one-pointed, very serene. In Pali is known as passaddhi. The Supreme Buddha explains when a person gets this, feels tranquility, when his mind and body becomes very calm, then he feels happiness. That's the cause for happiness. Now as you know, in the ordinary day, our body is always very heavy. The Supreme Buddha explains this heaviness is a result of the mental hindrances we have. Sensual desires, ill will, regret, restlessness, remorse, doubt. All these things are what results in our body being so heavy. In Pali it's known as sarajjikayo. The Supreme Buddha explains, if a person can get rid of those 5 hindrances, then he is able to calm this body and feel tranquility. The Supreme Buddha explains that this tranquility too has a cause. It does not lack a cause. And the cause for tranquility is rapture. Now what is rapture? Rapture is an extreme feeling of pleasure and joy. That's what rapture means. So the Supreme Buddha explains, when you feel this rapture, this extreme pleasure and happy and joy, that's when your body and mind gets calm. Now these are all things that you get when you practice the Dhamma path. This feeling of extreme pleasure and joy, they're not things that are gained through sensual pleasures. They're all separate. They're all separate from sensual pleasure. There are things you can experience when you practice the teaching of the Supreme Buddha. So the Supreme Buddha explains this rapture, this extreme feeling of joy and pleasure has a cause. So in order to feel that rapture, you must make sure you have this cause. The Supreme Buddha explains this cause is known as gladness. So those who have a gladdened mind are the ones who are capable of feeling rapture, this extreme feeling of pleasure. And the Supreme Buddha explains this gladness also has a cause. So if you want to feel this gladness, then there is a cause, there's a condition that you must meet. The Supreme Buddha explains the cause for this gladness is confidence in the Supreme Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha. So those who have confidence that the Blessed One is an Arahant, indeed migrated to the Supreme Buddha, eradicated desire, hatred and delusion. This Dhamma is well proclaimed. The Sangha, the noble bhikkhus and bhikkhunis who practice the Dhamma are definitely practicing the path to Nibbana. When you have confidence in this noble triple gem, that's the cause for feeling that gladness. When you have this confidence in the triple gem, then your mind expands and you feel glad, your mind becomes gladdened. So the cause for gladness is confidence in the triple gem. The Supreme Buddha explains, how do you gain this confidence? In Pali it's known as saddha. How do you gain saddha? The Blessed One explains, saddhati tathagatasya bodhi. When you have confidence in the Supreme Buddha's knowledge and vision, the Supreme Buddha's understanding, then you can gain saddha. That's when you develop saddha. And that saddha is what helps you to gain a mind of gladness. Now, you must be wondering, how do you gain confidence in the Supreme Triple Gem? The Supreme Buddha explains in this sutta, O bhikkhus, I say that confidence in the Triple Gem has a cause. It does not lack a cause. What's the cause for faith, for confidence, pleasant mind about the Blessed One, the Dhamma and the Sangha? It should be said as suffering. So the Supreme Buddha explains, those who understand what is suffering are the ones who gain confidence in the Supreme Buddha, Dhamma and the Sangha. Why? Because it is the Supreme Buddha who found what is suffering. The Blessed One understood suffering, understood the cause of suffering, understood that it is indeed possible to put an end to suffering. It is the Blessed One who found the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. So a person who understands suffering, what is suffering? The Supreme Buddha explains, having to be born is suffering. If we weren't born, we won't have to go through aging. We won't have to face dangerous illnesses. We won't have to die. We won't have to become separated from the ones we love. Meritorious disciples, how many people in this world die? And how many people lament and cry when others die? When we have to separate from our loved ones, it causes suffering. And when we have to be together with people we don't like, that causes suffering. And when we are born, when we, little by little, we age, our beautiful black hair becomes gray. That causes suffering. Our body becomes weak, our teeth fall off, our skin wrinkles. Aging is suffering. When we are born in this world, we have to face numerous types of dangerous diseases like cancer, heart attacks, pressure, many different types of illnesses. And that causes suffering. The Blessed One understood this, and as a result of aging, illnesses, we suffer, and at the end we have to die, and that causes suffering. So the person who understands this suffering is the person who realizes indeed birth is suffering. The Supreme Buddha found the way to be free from this, and so he gains confidence in the Supreme Buddha. He gains confidence in the Dhamma, which teaches us the path that leads to the cessation of suffering, and he gains confidence in those people, in the noble monks and nuns who practices the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. So the Blessed One explains this confidence. The cause for confidence is understanding suffering. Next, the Supreme Buddha explains, O bhikkhus, suffering has a cause. It does not lack a cause. What is the cause for suffering? The Supreme Buddha explains, it should be said birth. The Blessed One explains, birth is what causes suffering. Meritorious disciple, if we were not born, would we have to age? Would we have to face illnesses? No, right? If we were free from birth, we wouldn't have to go through all this suffering. Suffering arises with birth. The Blessed One explains, birth is the cause for suffering. The Supreme Buddha explains, we are born, there are 4 types of births. We are born in mother's wombs. We are born inside of eggs. We are born in wet environments. We are born spontaneously. That is, the 4th way of birth is separate from the first 3. It's known as a spontaneous birth, a birth that's separate from being born in the womb, in an egg, or in a wet environment. So all these 4 types of birth gives us eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and a mind. And so as long as we have these 6 faculties, we have to age. They are the ones that age. Our eyes age. Our eyes are the ones that fall sick. Our eyes are the things that die. Our ears are what falls sick. They are the ones, ears age. Ears die. Our nose, our tongue, our body. These 6 faculties are what ages. They are the ones that get illnesses, and they are the ones that die. So with birth we get these 6 faculties. The Supreme Buddha explains, as long as, no matter what birth it is, as long as you get these 6 faculties, you have to suffer. Then the Supreme Buddha beautifully explains, because birth is a cause. It's not devoid of a cause. Meritorious disciples, what's the cause of birth? What causes birth? The Supreme Buddha understood this reality. The Supreme Buddha explains, I say because that birth too has a proximate cause. It does not lack a cause. The cause of birth is the arranging of karma. What is it? The arranging of karma. As long as there is the arranging of karma, we have to be born. The Supreme Buddha explains, if karma is arranged to be born in worlds of sensual pleasures like the human world or the God's world, heavenly world, then you're going to be born in worlds of sensual pleasures. And if the karma is arranged such that it leads to a birth in a form world, then you're reborn in a form world. Or if that karma is arranged in such a way that it leads to a birth in formless worlds, then you're reborn in formless worlds. So it is the arranging of this karma that leads to a birth. The Supreme Buddha explains, if there is no arranging of karma, then how can there be a birth? There is no birth. When the condition ceases to exist, the result ceases. Next, the Supreme Buddha explains, because I say that arranging of karma also has a cause. It is not without a cause. The Supreme Buddha explains, what's the cause for this arranging of karma? The Blessed One explains, clinging. Clinging is what causes the arranging of karma. The Supreme Buddha explains 4 types of clinging. Clinging to sensual pleasures, clinging to forms, sounds, odors, tastes, and tangibles. And then we cling to different views. Here, meritorious disciples, clinging means it's not something that you do on purpose. Clinging is a phenomena. It's something that happens. The Supreme Buddha explains, there's clinging to sensual pleasures, there's clinging to views, and then there's clinging to different practices and rituals, and then there's clinging to the view of self, thinking that there's an I, me, and mine. It's a deep penetrated feeling. The Supreme Buddha explains, clinging, when we cling to sensual pleasures, when we cling to different views, when we cling to different practices and rituals, then that clinging is what causes the arranging of karma. Meritorious disciples, think of it in this way. Now we get cling to something we heard, and so what we do is we willingly do things to get that sound. Now, if we heard someone's beautiful voice, we go out of our way to find that voice, and so in finding that voice, we do things through our body, mind, and speech. So we create karma. In doing so, the karma is arranged to be born in different worlds. So the Supreme Buddha explains, the cause for arranging of karma is clinging. And then the Blessed One explains, because there is a cause for clinging. It does not lack a cause. Because what's the cause for clinging? The Supreme Buddha explains, it should be said as craving. So craving is what causes clinging. Now, Meritorious disciples, think of it in this way. If we did not crave something, would we cling to it? We wouldn't get cling to it. Now, if we take food, for example, if we did not crave our favorite food, would we cling to that food? No. Because of craving, we get clinged. The Supreme Buddha explains, craving is what results in clinging. The Supreme Buddha explains, we crave sensual pleasures, and we have this craving to be born over and over again, and we crave not to be born. So we have these three types of craving, and as long as we have this craving, the Supreme Buddha explains, we cling. And then the Supreme Buddha explains, because craving also has a cause. It does not lack a cause. Or because what's the cause for craving? The Supreme Buddha explains, the cause for craving is feeling. Feeling is what causes craving. And the Supreme Buddha has explained, there are three types of feeling. We feel pleasure, we feel displeasure, and we have neutral feelings. The Supreme Buddha explains, when we see things with our eyes, we feel pleasure, we feel displeasure, or we have neutral feelings. When we hear things with our ears, we either feel pleasure, we either feel displeasure, or we feel neutral feelings. In this way, when we feel things through our six faculties, we either feel pleasure, displeasure, or neutral feelings. And so when we feel pleasure, what happens is we crave it. Now when we taste our favorite food, we get a good pleasure. We feel pleasure. And so what happens is we crave that food. As a result of that pleasure, that feeling of pleasure, we crave it. And then the next time we get something that we don't like, what happens is when we taste something that causes displeasure, because we like that feeling of pleasure, we feel aversive because we crave that food we like. So it was the craving, it was that pleasure feeling, that feeling of pleasure that caused craving. So the Supreme Buddha explains, these three types of feelings, pleasure, displeasure, and neutral feelings, are what causes craving. The Supreme Buddha explains, the cause for feeling is contact. What's the cause for feeling? Contact. Contact means the getting together of three things. When the I, the form, and the I consciousness gets together, there arises this phenomenon called contact. And with contact, we feel. When the ears, a sound, and the consciousness of the ear gets together, it gives rise to contact, and through contact we feel. So in this way the Supreme Buddha explains, the cause for feeling is contact. Next the Supreme Buddha explains, because there's a cause for contact, it does not lack a cause. The Supreme Buddha explains, the cause for contact are the six sense faculties. So these eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body and mind, these six faculties are the cause for contact. Now, Meritorious disciples, think of it in this way. If we did not have this faculty of eye, would contact arise? No. If we did not have an eye, contact wouldn't arise, because contact is the getting together of three things: the eye, the form, and the consciousness of the eye. So the Supreme Buddha explains, it is these six faculties that gives rise to contact. It's what conditions contact. Next, the Supreme Buddha explains, there is a cause for these six sense faculties. So we have these eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body and mind because it was caused by something. the Blessed One reveals to us what that cause is. The Supreme Buddha explains the cause for these 6 sense faculties are mentality and materiality. The Supreme Buddha explains what is mentality and materiality. Materiality means the physical form, material form. So that includes the earth element and things that are made up of the earth elements. That is, things that are solid, things that gets decayed into earth. That's known as the earth element. And then there's the heat element. And then there's the water elements. Water element refers to things that float. So things that gets together with water, float with water, are known as the water element. And then there's the air element. Things that gets mixed with air. Now if we take this body for example, this body is made up of solid things that gets decayed into earth, right? The hair we have, the nails we have, the skin we have gets decayed into earth with death. So it's made up of the earth element. And then it's made up of the water element. There are things that gets mixed with water, things that floats with water, like saliva, like blood. They get mixed with water. And then there's the heat element in us. And then there's the air element. There's air inside of us. The air we breathe in and out, the air that's in our organs. In this way, this body we take as I, me and mine is made up of these 4 great elements. So these 6 faculties are made up of these 4 great elements. But there's another part to it. That's the materiality part, and then there's the mentality part. These 6 faculties are made up of that material part, the materiality part, and that materiality part has another component to it. That's the mentality part. Mentality includes 5 things: feelings, perception, volitional formations, attention, and consciousness. So when these 5 things known as mentality is joined with materiality, it gives rise to the 6 faculties. The Supreme Buddha explains the 6 faculties are caused by mentality and materiality. And then the Supreme Buddha explains mentality and materiality also has a cause. It does not lack a cause. The cause of mentality and materiality is consciousness. There's the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness. In this way, there's consciousness that arises in the 6 faculties. Consciousness means the ability to know things, cognize things. That's what consciousness means. And this cognition, this ability to cognize things, is what conditions mentality and materiality. And then the Supreme Buddha explains there's a cause for this consciousness. It does not lack a cause. The cause of consciousness is known as sankhara. Sankhara has 3 types: kaya sankhara, vachi sankhara, chitta sankhara. Kaya sankhara means breathing in and out. Since it's bound with the body, it's known as kaya sankhara. And then there's vachi sankhara, that is vitakka vichara in Pali. And it's known as, vitakka means applied thought, vichara means sustained thought. Since it's bound with speech, it's known as vachi sankhara. And then there's chitta sankhara, that includes feelings and perception. Since it's bound with the mind, feelings and perceptions are bound with the mind, it's known as chitta sankhara. So the Supreme Buddha explains these 3 types of sankhara is what conditions, is what causes consciousness. And then the Blessed One explains sankhara also has a cause. It does not lack a cause. The cause of sankhara is avijja. Avijja means ignorance. Ignorance means not knowing the 4 noble truths. So not knowing the 4 noble truths, avijja, is what conditions sankhara. And sankhara conditions consciousness. Consciousness conditions mentality and materiality. Mentality and materiality conditions the rising of 6 faculties. The 6 faculties causes contact. So the person who understands the truth about suffering is the person who understands the reality of the 5 aggregates of clinging. Because remember, the Supreme Buddha in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta explained, when taken in short, these 5 aggregates of clinging is what causes suffering. So if a person understands the reality of the 5 aggregates of clinging, the origin and its cessation, then that person has understood the cause and cessation, the origin, the cessation, and how a person can become free from the 5 aggregates of clinging. He understands the reality of suffering. And so when he understands this reality of the 5 aggregates of clinging, when he understands suffering as it really is, what happens is he forms a pleasant mind about the Supreme Buddha. And he gets gladness, and that gladness causes rapture. That rapture causes tranquility, the calming of his body and mind. And that rapture causes happiness, and that happiness leads to a concentrated mind. And so that concentrated mind leads to the knowledge and vision of seeing things as it really is. And that knowledge leads to disenchantment, and that disenchantment leads to dispassion. And dispassion, when you feel dispassion, you become liberated. When you become liberated, you get the knowledge that you have been liberated. So meritorious disciples, in this way the Supreme Buddha explains beautifully how a person understands suffering and how a person becomes liberated. The Blessed One uses a beautiful simile, because it's just like this. It's just like when rain pours down in thick droplets on the mountaintop. That water flows down along the slope and it fills the clefts, gullies and creeks. And when those clefts, gullies and creeks are filled, what happens is the pools get filled up. When those pools get filled up, larger lakes gets filled up. And when those lakes get filled up, they fill up streams, and when those streams fill up, rivers are filled. When those rivers are filled, they end up filling the great ocean. Meritorious disciples, in this way the Supreme Buddha explains to us how ignorance causes the continuation of birth. The Supreme Buddha explains how ignorance becomes the cause for sankhara, and how sankhara causes the consciousness, and how consciousness causes mentality and materiality. In this way the Supreme Buddha explains how suffering is caused. So in short, the Supreme Buddha explains not knowing the Four Noble Truths is what causes suffering. And if a person understands the Four Noble Truths, then that person gets to understand the reality of life. He gets to understand the reality of these 5 aggregates of clinging. And when he understands the 5 aggregates of clinging, the Supreme Buddha explains, when he knows and sees the reality of the 5 aggregates of clinging, then he becomes capable of destroying all taints that drag us to these different destinations. Meritorious disciples, if we can understand this dependent origination, then we become capable of understanding the reality of life. And if we understand the Four Noble Truths, at least to an extent, we become capable of becoming free from being born, at least in bad destinations. And within a maximum of 7 births, we become capable of being free from all suffering. We become capable of attaining Nibbana. So meritorious disciples, today we learned a beautiful sutta that explains the theory of cause and effect. We learned about why we continue in this long journey of samsara, and we learn the solution to becoming free from this long journey of samsara. So I bless you. May you have the opportunity to contemplate about this amazing teaching we learned today, and may you have the opportunity to understand the dependent origination and become free from this samsara in this Gautama Supreme Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu.